Hello and welcome to my channel. This is Creepy Dread, your storyteller of choice. Today I have some particularly creepy stories for you. From an attic and its dark secret, a girlfriend who talks in her sleep, to a mysterious woman at a hospital bedside. Enough talk, and let's dive in. I wish you a good night. When I was a child, I lived in a bizarre little house. It was incredibly tall and thin, like an attached house, except freestanding with 3 floors, a basement, and an attic. The house was full of quirks that gave it an unusual charm. 2 fully functional fireplaces, a shower stall in the center of the basement, and a backyard so small you could barely take 5 steps without hitting the fence. But perhaps the most peculiar feature was the old rope-pulled dumbwaiter that led from the kitchen up to my bedroom. I loved that weird little place, with its creaking floorboards and mysterious corners. Felt like living inside a giant puzzle box. But as charming as it was, the house was incredibly old, and the repair costs soon became too much for my parents to handle. Eventually, we had to make the difficult decision to move. Preparing for the move was a monumental task. I packed most of my things myself, throwing some of them down the dumbwaiter for fun, and cramming all my clothes into the closet until they formed a solid brick of fabric. While clearing out that closet, I stumbled upon something I had never noticed before, a hidden attic entrance in the roof. Being the curious kid I was, I couldn't resist the temptation to explore. I climbed up, using the clothes as a makeshift ladder, and pulled myself into the attic for my first and last exploration of the topmost part of our strange little house. The first thing I noticed was that it wasn't as dark as I had expected. The attic was strung with old red Christmas lights that still glowed faintly, casting a sinister crimson light over everything. A dozen cracks and holes in the floorboards offered glimpses into the bedrooms below, adding to the eerie atmosphere. The attic was set up for habitation. Someone had gone to great lengths to make it livable. The insulation was plasticed away, and there was an old gurney piled with sleeping bags and sheets. In one corner, a rusted mint green refrigerator hummed softly. Out of curiosity, I opened it and was surprised to find that it still worked. But it was the third thing I noticed that sent chills down my spine. Bones. There were bones everywhere. A lot of bones. As a kid, I didn't have a great understanding of anatomy, but I could tell these bones came from all sorts of creatures. Small bones, large bones, clean and white, piled haphazardly into heaps around the center of the attic. Some of the piles were blackened, as if someone had tried to burn them, and the walls nearest those piles were scrawled with dark, charred messages. Most of the writing was just smears, but one word stood out clearly among the chaos: sorry. It appeared multiple times, scrawled in a hurried, desperate manner. My heart pounded in my chest as I took in the disturbing scene. I realized that for 8 years while I slept below, this macabre collection had been sitting right above my head. I scrambled back down, my mind reeling with fear and confusion. I tried to make sense of what I had seen, but there were no easy answers. I didn't tell my parents about the attic. I wasn't sure they would believe me, and a part of me wanted to pretend it was just a bad dream. The memories of that attic haunted me for years. I often wondered who had lived up there and what they were doing with those bones. Why the word sorry was scrawled over the walls, and why they had left everything behind. To this day, I'm not sure what really happened in that attic, but the experience left me with a deep sense of unease. So if you ever find yourself in a strange old house, take a moment to wonder what might be hiding just out of sight. I would like to tell you about my girlfriend who talks in her sleep. At first, it was adorable and made for great stories to share with friends. It was always harmless nonsense. Things like, the sky is folding, or we need to raise the ground. We'd laugh about it the next morning, and I'd ask her if she remembered her dreams. She never did. Her sleep talking was a source of amusement, something light-hearted in our lives. But now, I wish she'd just stay silent. What happened last night has changed everything. Every night we have our little routine. We start by cuddling, but eventually it gets too hot, and we settle into our usual positions, back to back, each on our own side. She always falls asleep before I do, so I get the full show of her nightly musing. I used to love hearing what she'd say in her dreams, eager to share her bizarre sleep talk with our friends. But last night, it became something I never want to hear again. It was around 11 p.m. She was already asleep, and I was still up, reading a book. We were back to back when I heard her mumble something under her breath. It was too faint to understand, so I leaned over to look at her face. She was sleeping peacefully, so I returned to my book, thinking nothing of it. As I got absorbed in the pages, I eventually drifted off to sleep. The next thing I knew, I was jolted awake by the sound of her talking, loud and clear. I opened my eyes, and at some point in the night, we had both turned to face each other. Her eyes were wide open, staring straight at me, just inches away from my face. But those eyes, they weren't seeing me. It was like she was looking through me, her gaze hollow and unsettling. Her eyes were terrifyingly wide, as if she was trying to stretch them to see everything all at once. These were the eyes I fell in love with, but now they scared the hell out of me. My heart was pounding, adrenaline rushing through my veins as I threw off the covers and jumped out of bed. As I moved, her eyes followed me, but her body remained still. I told myself maybe it was the book light, keeping her awake, and maybe she'd said, "Can you please turn that off?" But something was wrong. Her eyes darted from me to the wall, to the door, and then the ceiling. I dared to ask her, "Are you all right?" No response, but those eyes locked onto mine when I spoke. Her breathing was steady, that slow rhythm of someone deeply asleep. And then, while looking right at me, she said in a voice too deep to be hers, "I'm back to bed, dearie." She'd never called me dearie before. We had pet names, sure, Pumpkin, Baby, Cupcake. But dearie sounded like something from a different era, something my grandmother might say. I needed more information before climbing back into bed with a possibly possessed girlfriend. "Are you awake, sweetie?" I asked. No response. Her eyes darted around again, landing back on me. Just as I was about to leave the room, her eyes rolled back into her head, showing only the whites. It was chilling in the dim light, and she insisted, "Of course I'm awake. Come back to bed," tapping her fingers on the comforter. Looking at her hands, I thought maybe she was awake. They were moving, right? But no, her fingers were splayed in odd directions, as if she was trying to simulate control, but failing. Those weren't my girlfriend's hands. I said, "I'm gonna get a drink of water, baby. Be right back. Can I get you anything?" I planned to run the moment I was out of the room, but she wasn't having it. In that deep, chilling voice, she said, "Take one step out of that door, and I will rip out your throat and shit down your neck." I was shocked, but knew I had to keep my cool. I replied, "As interesting a proposition as that is, I think I'm going to." And I grabbed my water bottle from the nightstand. She started screaming, a high-pitched, bird-like shriek that pierced the night. It felt like the neighbors 3 houses down could hear it. As fast as I could, I unscrewed the lid and doused her with water. Like some kind of magic, her eyes closed, her fingers relaxed, and she slipped back into a peaceful sleep. I'm sleeping on the couch now, maybe forever. She'll understand when she wakes up. Maybe it was just a nightmare, a glitch in her sleep cycle. But whatever it was, I'm not taking any chances. And remember, sometimes the ones we love the most are the ones who can scare us the most. It was a normal night. I was upstairs in my room, completely engrossed in my video games. The volume was cranked up, drowning out the world around me. I was in the zone, laser-focused on the screen when something broke through my gaming trance. I thought I heard noises coming from downstairs. At first, I dismissed it, assuming it was just the game or maybe the house settling. But the unease crept in. So, I muted the TV and listened closely. Nothing, just silence. I shrugged it off, went back to playing, thinking it was all in my head. Another hour passed, and then I heard it again, louder this time. There was no mistaking it. Something was definitely off. I was starting to freak out. My heart was pounding as I made my way downstairs to the basement, convinced that's where the sound was coming from. I hesitated at the door, every instinct screaming to turn back. But I had to know. As soon as I opened the basement door, a cold breeze washed over me, sending a shiver down my spine. I descended the stairs, and my heart sank when I saw the basement window wide open. I was 100% sure I had closed and locked all the windows before. Panic surged through me, and I was ready to bolt out of there, when something stopped me in my tracks. That's when I noticed it. The closet door was slightly cracked open. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, frozen in fear, my mind racing. I had to know what was inside. With trembling hands, I moved closer and reached for the doorknob. My heart was pounding in my chest when suddenly, a creepy crackle came from inside the closet. I've never moved faster in my life. I sprinted up the stairs, locked the door, and grabbed my phone. My hands were shaking as I dialed 911, praying they'd arrive in time. The cops arrived quickly, faster than I could have hoped. They moved through the house with precision, checking every corner. My heart was still racing when I heard a gunshot from the basement. Minutes later, they emerged with a deranged-looking man, probably homeless, clearly unwell. They told me they'd opened the closet door and found him inside. He'd had a gun and fired at them, but thankfully, he missed. The cops disarmed him and took him away. The scariest part? How close I came to opening that door myself. If I had, I might not be here to tell the tale. It's terrifying to think that danger was lurking just beyond that door, waiting for me. Let this story be a reminder to always trust your instincts and stay vigilant. You never know what's hiding in the shadows. Stay safe. It's 2:49 a.m., and I'm lying awake in bed, staring into the shadows. I'm on my right side, feeling the weight of the night pressing down on me. My wife is behind me, and I can sense her eyes on my back, a silent stare that sends a chill down my spine. She's always been a night owl, but tonight, something feels off. Her presence is different. It's unsettling. Her breathing is heavy, rhythmic, but with a strange edge that sets my nerves on fire. I know I should turn around, ask her if she's okay. But fear roots me in place, like I'm trapped in a nightmare, where moving isn't an option. Minutes tick by, and now it's 3:03 a.m. I feel her shifting closer, inch by inch. Her hand brushes the back of my hair and my skin crawls. Why is her touch so cold? I can sense the door to our room in the dark, just a few feet away. Every instinct screams to jump up and bolt for it, but I stay put, trying to convince myself I'm just being silly. It's 3:13 a.m. now, and she's so close I can feel her breath on my neck. It's rancid, like decay, nothing like the warm, familiar scent I know. Panic sets in as something hard presses against my back. It's not sharp, but the weight of it is suffocating. Is it a knife? My mind races as terror grips me. I gather every ounce of courage, ready to spring up and flick on the light, when suddenly the hallway outside our room is illuminated. I hear footsteps on the stairs, familiar, hurried steps. It's my wife. She's on the phone, her voice trembling with tears. She's talking to her mom, and I catch snippets of her words. Something about her grandpa. He passed away earlier today. He never liked me much. Always seemed to look right through me. That's when it hits me. The realization settles in like ice in my veins. Whatever was behind me wasn't my wife. It wasn't something living. It was something else. Something that had slipped between the world of the living and the dead, perhaps with a message of malice, or maybe just to deliver a final, unwanted farewell. I sat there, trembling, trying to make sense of it all. My mind was racing, a whirlwind of fear and confusion. How could this be possible? I listened to the hushed murmur of my wife's voice from the hallway, her sorrow-filled words a stark contrast to the terror I just experienced. Her footsteps paused outside the bedroom door, and I watched as her silhouette lingered in the dim light. Her voice dropped lower, as if she sensed that something wasn't right, and she turned the doorknob with slow deliberation. She stepped inside, her eyes meeting mine with a mix of worry and confusion. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to tell her everything, but the words stuck in my throat like shards of glass. I glanced toward the window, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows, but there was nothing there. Just the gentle sway of the curtains in the night breeze. But the room felt different, charged with an energy that was both unsettling and inexplicable. "Did you hear anything earlier?" I asked, my voice shaky, betraying the fear that lingered in every corner of my mind. She shook her head, her expression shifting from concern to disbelief. She moved closer, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder, her touch warm and real, a stark contrast to the cold presence that had haunted me moments before. "It must have been a dream," she suggested, trying to reassure me. though doubt flickered in her eyes. But it didn't feel like a dream. The memory was too vivid, too raw. I could still feel the phantom pressure on my back, the chill of breath on my neck. My heart pounded with an inexplicable sense of dread. A soft knock at the door interrupted us, pulling our attention away. My wife and I exchanged glances, her eyes mirroring my own uncertainty and fear. The door creaked open, revealing nothing but the empty hallway. Yet the air seemed to hum with a whisper, a sound too faint to comprehend. It was like an echo from another time, another place, carrying with it a sense of foreboding. In that moment, we stood together, facing the unknown as a united front. The house was still, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. There was a presence here, one that transcended our understanding, a lingering specter of the past, watching, waiting. Back in August 2020, I woke up one morning feeling strange, disoriented. Before I knew it, I had collapsed, vomiting blood all over the place. Panic ensued as I was rushed to the hospital. The doctors quickly discovered that I was on the brink of death. A massive stomach ulcer had been silently bleeding, filling my stomach with blood. In those moments before emergency surgery, I was terrified. I didn't know if I was going to make it. Thoughts of my kids flashed through my mind, and I couldn't shake the fear of never seeing them again. While lying there, trying to come to terms with my fear, a woman entered my room. She was different from everyone else, dressed entirely in black, unlike the nurses or any other staff. Her presence was calming yet strange. She looked at me with kind eyes and asked, "Are you doing okay?" I nodded, trying to put on a brave face. Then she asked, "Are you scared?" Her voice was soothing, and despite my fear, I felt a strange sense of peace. I admitted, "Yes, I am. I'm not religious, but in that moment of desperation, I wanted any help I could get." She asked if she could pray for me, and I said, "Yes, please." I don't remember the exact words of the prayer, but I remember feeling a warmth, a sense of comfort. She finished the prayer, looked at me, and said, "Everything is going to be okay. I'll see you later." Then she left, disappearing into the corridors of the hospital. I spent 17 days in that hospital, slowly recovering. As the days passed, I thought about that woman. She never returned, and none of the hospital staff seemed to know who she was. It wasn't until I was back on my feet that it hit me. She wasn't dressed like anyone else in the hospital. Who was she? What was she? I hadn't been given any pain medicine or sedatives at the time, so I knew it wasn't a hallucination. 3 years have passed, and I still can't shake the feeling that this encounter was more than just a chance meeting. Was she an angel? A ghost? Or something else entirely? Her presence remains a mystery, an enigma that lingers in the back of my mind.